Welcome back to another episode. Today's topic is stimulus. Stimulus. What is stimulus? Well, if you remember us talking a little bit about negotiation, you'll remember that all negotiation is an interaction or a dance between stimulus and response. And so the reason we're talking about stimulus today is because it falls into one of those two categories: stimulus, response, right? And we want to actually make sure we understand that when we talk about negotiation. So all stimulus is it is a trigger or an action taken to create a response. That's all a stimulus is. So if you remember the Pillsbury commercial, which I remember from back in the day, the whole experience they created was that every time somebody poked the Pillsbury Dough Boy, he would go, woohoo, right? That was the stimulus. The finger poking him was a stimulus, and the response was him laughing. Now, you can't predict that will happen with everybody, but they made a predictable response out of that commercial because they wanted you to remember the Pillsbury Doughboy, right? So that's what stimulus actually does. It's a trigger. So the trigger was finger poking the Pillsbury Doughboy, right? And that was to elicit a particular response. One of the responses or one of the examples that we most likely use today, and maybe not even at these times, was the handshake, right? The handshake, anytime you extend your hand, it was common courtesy for someone else to put out their hand in exchange and you shook hands. But these days, with the coronavirus lockdown and the social distancing measures, that's not the preferred approach. From what I've seen online, what do they do now? They do elbow bumps. So, you take your elbow, boom. That's one way to do it. And then the other one I believe I saw on Facebook is kind of the foot-to-foot handshake instead of hands. So, again, different times, different measures. But again, we still have stimuli that we use, and they generate a particular response. Now, the cool thing about stimuli is stimuli can be anything. It does not matter what it is. It could be absolutely anything. So anything in this world, could create a stimuli. It could create a particular response. But the big important thing to measure from that is the response is normally predictable. Now, it's not predictable for everyone as far as everyone doing the exact same thing, but those are what represent cultural norms. So what most people will do, that represents a cultural norm in regards to a response. So before the coronavirus, most people will put out their hands and shake it. After the coronavirus hit, most people won't do that anymore unless maybe they're wearing gloves or unless they're in the same household or, whatever else you have it. But the times have changed and the cultural norms are also changing. So it's actually really good and important to understand what stimuli are, how they used to work, and how they actually work now, because there's a change that's actually happening, right? So the biggest thing about stimuli is if you do the same thing again and again and again and again, it becomes a cultural norm. But at the same time, if you observe somebody having a particular response every time you incorporate a stimuli, then that's their actual behavior. Now, all behavior is that response side from the stimulus. So if you take everything that someone does, an individual or a group, and you look at, okay, if I do this, what happens? If I do this, what happens? If I do this, what happens? If I insert a stimuli, what's the response? The response ends up being that behavior. So the behavior itself becomes very predictable over time because you see it again and again and again and again. And that's how we actually learn. And we understand how particular people actually think and how they interact with their environments based on their behavior. So if you notice that you have a friend or a kid or someone who does the same thing again and again and again, that's their behavior. And sometimes you actually, let's say, want to correct what that response is going to be. So maybe you change the stimuli that you actually put out there so that you get a different response, right? So for example, I know sometimes my son loves playing video games and he wants me to play. So he's like, Dad, Tekken, Tekken, Tekken. And he'll say it again and again and again and again. And I'm a fan of video games, but sometimes he asks me too much. And, I respond when he asks about like 5 or 10 times, like, that's enough, right? Like, he knows if he keeps asking, he's going to hit that limit. But when he says it once or twice, he definitely has my attention a little bit, right? Because I love playing that game too. So I'll probably usually put some time aside. But if he asks too much, the answer is no. Because I don't want him understanding or thinking that every time he asks me for something, and if he just keeps asking, that I'll actually say yes. So I want to make sure that I put out a different response so I get a different stimulus coming in. I don't want him to keep asking and asking and asking. Just ask once or twice so I know what you need and let that be it, right? So that's how we actually can use stimulus to our advantage, where based on the response that we actually put out there, we can kind of change the stimulus as far as how to reach out to us. So why is stimulus important? Well, it's based on cause and reaction, right? So the whole idea is stimulus, response, cause, reaction. If you do something, you have, let's say, an expected response. And kids are excellent at trying out at pushing the boundaries, because they'll do stuff again and again and again and again. And they're testing the waters. They're testing to see, okay, how far can I get with it this time or this time or this time? And usually, I don't know about you, but my kids love experimenting the most when they're at home. Why? Because they're in a trusted environment where they know the consequences aren't going to be too high if they actually make a mistake. And then also with that, they're looking to push the boundaries because they want to figure out how my parents actually work. What will happen if I keep asking for this or I keep asking for that? And we're the best people for them to test, their theories on. So that's why, if anything, parents probably have the hardest time with their kids, because that's where the kids are learning from. They're trying to figure out, how far can I push mom? How far can I push dad? So kids are excellent at putting out stimulus, and they're learning as they're actually doing it. Something else is, again, the kids do it again and again because they want to know, how far can I go before, I start getting into dangerous territory. And then they kind of learn from that, and they might reel it back a little bit. But reading behavior can provide you a significant advantage anytime you're looking to negotiate. That's why kids are some of the best negotiators out there, because they have nothing to lose. So they'll keep pushing and pushing and pushing those boundaries as far as they possibly can go. Now, another example of stimuli that could be either a stimulus or response, but something that's very effective within negotiation that I know you've seen before is the flinch. The flinch is where essentially you act like you got physically assaulted when you actually hear something or observe something. And what it actually does is it discredits credibility. So I know my kids are really good at this, and my wife is too. She really is. So I'm trying to think of an example. So one example would be, when my son asked me to do something, and he's like, "Hey, Dad, you said you play that video game, remember?" I was like, "Yes, you got me there. You got me there." And he's like, "How much time? How much time?" And I said, 15 minutes. And, he's like, "Okay, well, I'm going to set a timer." He sets a 15. No, he gives me an extra 5 minutes because he's learning from me, right? So I was like, "I'll give you 20 minutes because you said it was only going to take you 15, so I'll give you an extra 5. And then, 25-minute rolls around, and he's just like, it's like, "Dad, you're not on it. You're still doing that work. You need to pull yourself away, play me some video games." So he'll come up here and be like, "Dad." So, you can physically see on his face, like, "Come on, you made a promise. You made a promise. Don't you believe promises are important? Is that what you always tell me?" So he uses, my own words against me, and saying that, "Hey, remember you said you promised. You said you do it in 20 minutes. Or you said you do it in 15, not 20, 15. And now it's 25 minutes later." And, I had to placate him. And I was like, "Okay, you know what? I did say that. Just let me finish up what I'm doing here, and then I'll be right down." But I've been notorious for doing work and kind of pushing some of the other stuff on the back burner. But anytime he gets the word, "I promise and I will do it," that's something I had to step up and do. So he actually uses that against me, right? But the flinch is so effective because it really just takes whatever someone's dishing out and it'll be like, "Really?" Like, the flinch is just like, you can see it on my face, like, "Really? No way." I mean, so we use flinch all the time, and kids are so good at it. And I don't know, for mothers out there, my wife, oh my gosh, there must be a special class when they kind of grow up and go through life, because you can see the flinch, like, it's just a complete transformation of the face. It's just like, what? Oh my gosh, I think my wife actually, she heard me. I think I heard Google say something to me just now, right? But her face is just like, it just contorts, and you're like, "Oh," it's like, let me stand back from that. It doesn't look safe. Let me stand back from that. So that's what stimuli do. I mean, they can be incredibly powerful, and the flinch is no exception to that rule. Incredibly powerful. And anytime you use it, it pretty much just takes something that someone's putting out there and it says, "Nope," in a very sort of just shrewd and effective manner. And the big thing about it is you're not discrediting the person, you're just discrediting the argument. So it's not something that is considered wrong or rude or anything. You're just it's like you didn't even really put that out there, did you? So that's what the flinch can actually do. Now the counterpart is a response, and we're actually going to have another talk and conversation about the response. But the stimuli is the focus for today, and the big question is, how does stimuli affect you? Now remember, the biggest thing with stimuli is they're meant to create a response. And what many people may not realize is that the more you look at how certain stimuli create responses in folks, the better you can actually understand behavior. The big reason for that is behavior is a comfort zone for people. The more you do something again and again and again, that's where you feel comfortable and you keep doing it. And behaviors can change, but believe it or not, the longer a behavior has actually been conducted again and again and again, the harder it is to actually stop it. So one example of that is, you go out these days, you see someone that and with the social distancing measures and everything else, if they put out their hand, your inclination is to, go out and shake their hand too. But then you kind of remember, it's like, ho, 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 we have different rules now. We got to do the elbow or we got to do the foot shake, right? So that's something you have to train yourself to do. And that's not easy. And there's a lot of other things out there in regards to the behaviors that we have that can be very difficult to change. But even if we can't change them easily, we want to know that they are behaviors. We want to know how we react and how we respond to certain things. Because if we don't, believe it or not, those things can actually be used against you. And one prime example of that is the whole idea with, let's say, consumer spending and data privacy online. Because you have certain behaviors when you do online shopping. And believe it or not, those behaviors are actually taken in by businesses, and they actually can figure out, well, when do you buy things? What do you like? All these various things, right? So it makes it very easy for them to gather a lot of information and then, give you exactly what you want in the way that you want it, where it's really hard for you to say no, right? So that's why there's a big battle right now as far as online privacy, what companies are actually doing with their data, because it's this whole idea of negotiation and stimuli and response. And the more information you can gather to see what people's behaviors are, the more you can essentially market to them and actually get them to say yes. So that's why you actually want to be aware of these things. So if there's anything you take away from today's talk, know that know your stimuli, I should say, to stay in control of your behavior. So know what your triggers are, right? I know for one that I like things that are neat. So one of my triggers is if anything's kind of a mess, I'm like, oh, that's something I have to deal with, right? Like that's kind of my flinch, especially, I give that to my wife and my son. So that's my flinch. I was just like, you need to put this away. You need to do this. You need to do that. So that's me. So that's, I know my stimuli. So I know if anyone wanted to get under my skin, that's what they would do. So I also had to recognize that, hey, if that's my stimuli, sometimes I got to, take a step back and recognize that, okay, that's not the most important thing I have to worry about. But again, I'm aware of it, so now I can actually do that. So, homework assignment for you is figuring out what your stimuli are and how they actually cause you to react if that does happen. And if anything, come up with a response, for those stimuli so that you can make sure that you're putting your best foot forward and you're making the response that you want to make. So again, I hope you enjoyed this segment on stimulus. Tune into the next one on response. Looking forward to catching up on that. Bye.